Second by Ms. Patton. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. It's unanimous. All members are present except Councilman Meisner. Anything to be removed from the consent agenda?
Yes, sir. I'd like to request that a few items be removed from the consent agenda.
I'm sorry. You have a right to speak at the end of the meeting.
Well, you know, it says on my, every time you have a handout, it says the consent agenda is the first portion of the city council agenda, and it includes items which are considered to be routine by the city council. These items are enacted by one motion with no discussion unless a council member or a citizen requests an item to be removed from the consent agenda for a separate discussion. Of course, I'm sure tonight would not be the time for a separate discussion since there's no time for discussion during the city council meeting. So I would like to go ahead and have those have a few items removed for another time. Sure.
Is that, I always thought that meant that the citizen had to request it before the meeting.
Well, that is correct, unless council votes by majority vote to allow the matter to be heard this
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. I'm sorry.
I said that the council has to vote by majority vote to allow something that's not on the agenda or a request from a citizen to address something on the agenda that hasn't been put in writing by 5 o'clock Wednesday prior to the Tuesday meeting, or ask it to be considered as a matter not on the agenda.
Okay.
Or
so
ask council to.
So just the instructions say, the mayor will ask if anyone present wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda, at which time anyone present can ask for that to be done. As a citizen, if you wish to have an item removed from the consent agenda for discussion, please just stand and voice your desire to the mayor and the council. So you think that your instructions are not accurate?
I think the
on the front
instructions
page?
are not accurate on the front page.
Well, unfortunately, you do that at every meeting, so I guess you have adopted these by your silence.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to suggest a motion which may help, and that would be that we consider the consent agenda at the conclusion of all the other items, at which point we can hear from the citizens and what needs to be removed.
A motion for Mr. Lael, second by Ms. Patton. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no.
And I also make the motion that we make sure that our instructions that are present at the table are in accordance with our general statutes and our instructions here.
Mr. Mayor, one other thing, just technicality, we skipped over the reaffirmation ratification on second reading.
Move approval of reaffirmation ratification.
Motion by Mr. Lael, second by Mrs. Fox. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. That motion's carried. Let's go to departmental report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, the first departmental report we'll need to skip over because it's asking you to consider a second reading of the traffic amendment, which is on consent agenda. So we'll need to come back to that. But I would ask Assistant City Manager Andrea Surratt to come to the podium and to make a presentation to City Council about Inspiring Spaces plan proposal.
Excuse me, I just wanted to clarify that we won't be discussing the things tonight that come off the consent agenda.
No, we will be discussing them and probably voting on them.
Well, you've always clarified that this meeting is not a time for discussion, that it would be another time when there would be discussion.
Now, what we have said is there's no time for discussion when a citizen takes their place at the podium. We listen, then we discuss, consider what the citizen said, consider what we say to each other, and then conduct a vote. Or make a motion not to conduct a vote.
Unless it's a public hearing, at which time all citizens have the rights to do.
But it's not a give and take.
So how do we ask for something to be on a public hearing?
To be on a public hearing?
Right.
you would have to ask the city manager to place that request on the agenda, and if the city manager decides it's something that ought to be considered by council, he would put it on the agenda. If he thinks it's something that council should not consider, he would put it on the agenda and advise council that, in his opinion, it shouldn't be on the agenda. And then council can, if they want to, by majority vote to consider the request of anybody from the public that was made ahead of time.
For a public hearing?
That's completely up to council. There are, if you look at the statute books, there are certain circumstances that require public hearings, and we give notice for those. You have to give notice, give it to the public the right to know that there's going to be a public hearing. And there are certain items that require a public hearing that the clerk notifies citizens and notifies the newspaper to post it in the newspaper. A notice is required by law. But other than what the law requires to have a public hearing on, council has to decide if it wants to have a public hearing on a matter that the law does not require a public hearing.
Well, when can a citizen request it obtain a public hearing?
As I said, you can ask the city manager to put that request on the council agenda. And it's up to him to decide to put it on the agenda or not. If he puts it on the agenda, then the request for a public hearing would come before council, and council would decide whether they wanted to have a public hearing pursuant to your request. If the city manager deems that it's not something that he would recommend be put on the agenda, then it's put on matters not on the agenda, and council then can consider if they want to honor a citizen's request to call for a public hearing, to vote by majority vote to have a public hearing. So council's either got to vote to have a public hearing on something that's not required by law, or the law entitles citizens to a public hearing on certain things that the statute says must have a public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
And I want to emphasize that you're going to get a chance to speak before we go to consent agenda.
Before you go to the consent agenda?